All right. Hello, everybody. I am Jayme CheeseSlice. I'm the engineer producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. And this is a show where we talk about things that you're not going to hear on mainstream media. So today we have Dan Kovalik, and he is working in Colombia with the president there for their next presidential election. And we're going to talk to him about that. If this is the first time you have watched Uncontrolled Opposition, however, I just want you to know this is a radio program first and foremost, and we have to record it for that session. We just decided to do the recording live on YouTube so you guys can watch us do the entire thing uncut. And sometimes we get a little bit of conversation that doesn't actually end up on the radio program as well. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Gloria and Jeremy. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, Jayme. Hey, Jeremy.
We'll put you guys in the right order, and I'm going to bring on Dan, and we're going to kick it off to Gloria, and she's going to start the show, and we're going to record for about 55 minutes, and then we'll stay on YouTube after that. Here's Dan, and then
Dan.
that's the bonus stuff that you don't get to see on the radio usually, but sometimes it makes it into the radio cut. All right, hi Dan, you are muted, just so you know, when Gloria's going to cue you up, make sure you're unmuted, and then let's go ahead and get started. So Gloria, take it away.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria, Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today, we are joined by our dear friend, Dan Kovalik, attorney, author, and activist. As an attorney for Colombia's President Gustavo Petro, Dan is here to tell us about the illegal economic coercive measures, otherwise known as sanctions, that have been lodged against its president. Also, Dan will discuss Colombia's upcoming national election and Washington's latest destabilization efforts using Ecuador as a proxy. The U.S. has shifted tactics over decades, from overt coups and direct interventions to lawfare and judicial political warfare to selective narco-terrorism, designations, sanctions, and military extractions against Latin American leaders who resist Washington's economic and geopolitical dictates, particularly over access to oil, minerals, including lithium, agriculture, labor, and other natural and human resources. As President Trump admitted on May 2nd at a rally in Florida to describe U.S. naval operations near the Strait of Hormuz, we took over the ship. We took over the cargo. We took over the oil. It's a very profitable business. We're like pirates. We're sort of like pirates, but we're not playing games. The gloves are off. The ruse that Washington's criminal behavior is really about democracy promotion or anti-drug idealism is over. This isn't 5D chess. These crimes are nothing more than gangster threats that sovereign nations without nuclear protection either comply with and keep resources flowing cheaply to U.S. corporate interests and avoid alliances with China, Russia, Iran, etc., or know that they will be subject to kidnappings and armed robberies on land and piracy at sea. Patriotic leaders pursuing national control over their natural resources, supporting fair wages and safe working conditions for their people against foreign corporate exploitation face currency destabilization, physical removal, legal prosecution, assassination, and debanking. U.S. involvement in Latin America U.S. involvement in Latin American regime change is well documented across decades, with dozens of direct and indirect interventions since the late 19th century. A stark recent example exposes the hypocrisy. In December 2025, President Trump issued a full pardon to former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who has been convicted in U.S. federal courts and sentenced to 45 years for conspiring to import massive quantities of cocaine, hundreds of tons, into the United States, along with related firearm offenses. Hernandez was released shortly after. Honduras, under him, was a key partner, cooperative on migration, security, and resource access. In contrast, on January 3rd, 2026, U.S. forces launched Operation Absolute Resolve, strikes in Caracas, Venezuela, followed by the military kidnapping and hostage taking of President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores under the false banner of narco terrorism. The operation enabled U.S. oversight of Venezuela's oil sector, privatization moves, and sanctions relief for compliant actors, literally at gunpoint. This reminds me of the critical activities done by organized crime in New York City, where businesses either paid the mafia for protection money or were tortured, killed, or had their businesses destroyed. The only difference here is that this extortion is done with our tax dollars. Hernandez, despite convictions on U.S. soil for flooding America with drugs, was a U.S. puppet, a traitor to his people, and thus pardoned. To the U.S., President Maduro and First Lady Flores are hostages that keep Venezuela's subservient to Washington's oil demands through extortion. Let's look at blatant coups. Guatemala, 1954. Chile, 1973. Brazil, 1964. Now we are mostly in the lawfare sanctions era. Brazil, Lula Dilma. Peru, Pedro Castillo. Argentina, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. Bolivia, Evo Morales. In summary, virtually every Latin American country experienced coups or attempts from 1940s onward, with a rapid progression since the Cold War. The pattern of targeting resource nationalists and independent leaders is unmistakable and reoccurring. The shift away from classic coups has not ended interference, it's only evolved into a subtler and sometimes not so subtle mechanism that achieves similar outcomes: compliant access to the region's wealth. This approach has produced instability, repression, migration waves, and resentment across the region. It prioritizes U.S. strategic and corporate dominance over consistent principles. The Maduro kidnapping and Hernandez pardon in quick succession are not anomalies. They are the latest demonstration of how the game is played. Thank you. Dan, please explain how you came to know the president of Colombia and what your goal is as his attorney.
Yes, well, I have known Gustavo Petro for maybe 20 plus years. I knew him first when he was a senator. At that time, I was very involved in Colombia. I had several human rights cases against U.S. companies like Coca Cola for allegedly supporting paramilitary death squads in the country to repress the trade union movement, including through murder. And at that time, Petro was a senator and he was speaking out against what was known as the para-political scandal. So I was dealing with the link between companies and the paramilitary death squads. He was outing politicians for their links to the same paramilitary death squads. So we were kind of doing the same or similar work at the time. I was actually, strangely enough, I was working for the Steelworkers Union as a lawyer at that time, and they allowed me to do this work. And at some point, Petro was, well, as he constantly is, he was threatened with assassination. And so I asked my legislative department in Washington to invite him to Washington to address, to give a Senate briefing on the human rights situation and the parapolitical scandal in Colombia. And that's when I met him. I met him when he came to Washington. And that was, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like that.
And what was his background? Can you just say a little more about how he got involved in politics and about his own background?
Yes, well, as a young man, he started out actually as a guerrilla. He was in the M19 urban guerrilla movement. And he ultimately was captured by the Colombian military. He was jailed. He was tortured. He ended up getting released as part of an amnesty that was granted as part of a peace agreement between the government of Colombia and the M19. And pretty quickly started, running for office. He became a congressman, then a senator, and then the mayor of Bogota. And then finally in 2022, he was elected president. And quite a surprising victory. I mean, he's the first leftist president of Colombia. The last guy who came close to becoming the first leftist president in 1948, a guy named Jorge Gaitan, he was assassinated shortly before the election, and many believe it was the CIA that pulled that assassination off.
And how would you assess his presidency as far as the war with the FARC? Is that ended now? And what are the more enlightened policies he's adopted since he's come in?
Yeah, well, the FARC and the government signed a peace accord. I believe it was quite a while ago. And that is largely held, though there are these dissident FARC members who still fight the government. In fact, carried out really a terrorist act a couple weeks ago. But largely it's held. Meanwhile, there's still many armed groups in Colombia that are operating in the country, including the ELN, which was, in my view, was a legitimate national liberation organization years ago, but I think is really morphed basically into a drug trafficking organization, which was really what happened to the FARC too. In any case, in terms of its enlightened policy.
Your sound's breaking up, Dan. On your microphone's sound is breaking up. Is there anything you can do? Maybe the button's a little loose or something?
Yeah. Is that better?
No.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's getting better.
I'm not sure it's on my end.
Okay, that's better. Yeah. Maybe just repeat what you said at the end there.
No, it's really we're having technical problems. Your voice is just breaking up. Do you hear that too, Jeremy?
I'm pretty sure it's on Dan's end.
I think it's on my end. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave and come back. All right, I'm going to leave.
Let's try that. Okay.
Yeah. Dan is sounding like he smoked 400 cigars and drank a liter of whiskey.
I hope not.
No, I mean that's what it sounds like in my head. In my headphones, it sounds like it doesn't sound like Dan.
Yeah, very robotic.
We've been having actually all of this targeted stuff on our show where like wild stuff happens while we're live, and it's been a bit challenging in the last, I don't know, three episodes. Oh, I think Dan's back.
Try it again.
Okay, and I'm hearing it on your end. I'm hearing that crackling. How do I sound?
You're still crackling. It just started like all of a sudden.
Maybe if you unplug your mic and just go through the mic in the laptop and just turn your volume down so you don't get reverb.
Yeah, I am doing that. Okay, I'm I'm going to turn it
Yeah,
down. How's that?
it sounds like interference in the microphone.
Yeah, I would. You have an external mic?
What's that?
Oh God, no! This is what happened to me last week.
This was going really well too. It was rolling.
Yeah, I can try to put in headphones, see if that helps.
Yeah.
This one's weird. We haven't had this problem before.
So I don't know. I don't know what end it's on.
Yeah, it's just, Dan, you're gonna have to lay off those cigars and whiskey, you know? It's just, interfering with your voice. No, I don't believe Dan smokes cigars and drinks whiskey. These are jokes, folks.
Allegedly. No.
How's that? Is that any
beautiful.
better?
Oh, you sound
That's
like
a lot better.
bell.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for
Oh,
that.
not at
Okay.
all.
Okay, so
Let's get back
I'll
to
jump
This
right
happened
back
to me
in.
last week, Dan, just so you feel better.
Great. So in terms of Petro's enlightened policies, he's really tried to deal with the armed groups and with the drug trade, in the most peaceful means he can. So he's tried to negotiate with the armed groups in order to make peace with them in return for their stopping their involvement in the drug trade. In terms of drug eradication, he's really tried to focus on voluntary crop substitution, in which he encourages farmers who grow coca, which is converted into cocaine, to instead grow things like coffee and chocolate. And that's been very successful. He's converted tens of thousands of hectares of land from coca production to legitimate crops. And even in terms of, when, big drug seizures, he's had some major accomplishments in seizing, many tons of cocaine, but in the process, he does it without killing people. He's very proud of that. And he has been very critical, of course, of the U.S. blowing up these alleged drug boats, So he's tried to very much humanize the country, which had been under a series of right-wing governments that were, again, very closely aligned with the paramilitary groups in carrying out terrible atrocities, And he's very much tried to reclaim the country from that type of violence. Now, of course, he hasn't been totally successful in that regard because it's a long-standing problem. But he certainly made some gains in that direction. He also, by the way, recently put forth the greatest minimum wage hike in Colombian history, 23% wage hike.
Wow.
So yeah, he's very popular. His approval rating is just around 50%, a little more sometimes, which for Colombia is very good. It's a very divided country. To have 50% support is rare, right? And of course, compared to U.S. presidents who often don't come close to that. So.
And what of the issue of U.S. military base? And I think the U.S. has 7 bases in Colombia? Is that?
Yeah, and they're still there.
I guess
Petro,
there's not much he can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, he's had to be very calibrated in terms of how he relates to the United States, because Colombia has been really the closest partner of the U.S. in South America for a long time. Even was, up till recently, a partner of NATO, though Petro took Colombia out of that partnership. But he hasn't gotten rid of the bases. I think that would be that would lead to a U.S. military intervention of some type.
Yeah.
So he's been careful in that regard.
So why are they targeting him with these sanctions? What are they claiming?
Well, so the sanctions were imposed in October, end of October of last year, very shortly after he gave a speech both within the United Nations in New York City and also on the street in New York City at a protest. Gave very fiery speeches against the war in Gaza. He's been very, very outspoken leader in the world against the genocide in Gaza. And he really upset Trump when he went out on the street to a protest and he encouraged U.S. troops not to follow the unlawful orders of Trump. Trump immediately pulled his visa.
Wow.
And he was sent home. And very shortly after, these sanctions were imposed upon him, his wife, one of his children, and the interior minister.
And what about Venezuela and Cuba? What has he done in response to the situation there?
Well, he is been very outspoken against the blockade of Cuba, and he has sent both fuel and other humanitarian aid to Cuba. He was also very critical, of course, of the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. He was never a fan of Maduro, in truth, but his position was it's up to the Venezuelans to deal with Maduro if they don't like him, right? If they want to try him for an alleged crime, it's up to the Venezuelans to do, not the United States. And he was very critical, of course, of the kidnapping. He recently visited the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, in Venezuela, and they had a good meeting to talk about, border issues and issues of Colombia wants to provide energy to Venezuela. So right now, the relations between Colombia and Venezuela are probably the best they've been in a long time.
And maybe you can discuss the upcoming election and how it's looking.
Yes, well, so Petro's party is the Pacto Histórico, a left-wing party, and made up of various left-wing groups.
Just for clarity, a point of reference. In Latin America, left means something very different than in the United States, and these terms left and right tend to alienate different groups who go, oh well, they're left, they're somehow
right.
Weird or weak or something, and right meaning that they care about law and they care about. So, just to getting away a little bit from these terms, I mean, really, it seems like Gustavo Petro always had, from the origins where you met him, always had a focus on working people and fairness. So,
well, yeah,
so when you say about leftism,
well, that's
what
what
really
the left
meaning,
is, Gloria. That's what the left is. We live in
that's
an environment of McCarthyism where the left was attacked for decades, so people equate it with bad things, when really, historically, the left represented policies like Dan was talking about, higher minimum wage, going after big corporations, trying to create a fair economy, higher taxes on the wealthy, more robust social programs, education, healthcare, antitrust, break up corporate monopoly. Those are traditional left-wing policies in the United States as well as in Latin America. But then, in the U.S. history, you had McCarthyism and the attack on the left and the poisoning of public discourse. So yeah, you're right.
In our country,
those concepts.
But in our country in general, people even equate the Democratic Party.
Yeah, the left. Democratic Party today is not a left-wing party.
We haven't seen that. Jeremy and I haven't seen that in a long time.
Well, because in our country, what happened is that the corporation took over both parties and the entire political system. So they played up these culture war issues. So the left becomes associated with support for gay marriage or
And blue
transgender
hair.
rights. And now you do have in the U.S. some candidates emerging who are trying to reclaim the New Deal tradition because of the huge inequality. But anyway, maybe Dan could comment on Colombia, how these issues play out, and if these culture war issues are as important in Colombian politics as they are in American politics.
Well, I just want to say, when you say left, what you really mean are in support of workers' rights, in support of indigenous people, in support of fairness. These are the things that the president is in support of.
Yes, and also in support of the Afro-Colombian community. Colombia has a large Afro-descendant population. And in fact, Petro's vice president is an Afro-Colombian woman. And that was a huge, monumental step for Colombia to have that. And he's very popular. Petro's very popular amongst the indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombians. I was at his inauguration, and many of the indigenous tribes had representation there at the inauguration, as did Afro-Colombians. And that's a huge change from other presidents. And his would-be successor, Ivan Cepeda from the Pacto Histórico party, represents the same ideas. He has an indigenous woman vice presidential candidate running with him. Right now, the polls look pretty good for him. Different polls have different, slightly different results, but anywhere from, the high 40 percentage points to the low 50 percentage points he's polling at right now. Against several other candidates, including 2 right-wing candidates. Now, as is true in most of Latin America, you have to get, when you have many parties, you have to get 50% of the vote or more in order to win on the first ballot, the first round, which is on May 31st. If he doesn't get that 50%, then he runs against the second highest vote tally, which is most likely going to be one of these 2 right-wing parties. It's not clear if he'll win on the first round, and if he doesn't, then it'll be very close, I think, the second round. So no one's counting their chickens at this point, but right now he has a comfortable lead. Again, if they didn't have the rule about the 50% rule, he would just win, outright, pretty easily. But yeah.
You had mentioned about Ecuador and some interference. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, Ecuador now is a wholly owned subsidiary of the United States, basically. There's U.S. troops there now. And Ecuador has been engaging in provocative acts against Colombia, including imposing 100% tariff on Colombian goods, which is crazy because, of course, they're on the border of Colombia, and that's almost tantamount to an act of war. And there have been some cross-border violations,
skirmishes.
Yes, and and Petro believes all that is calculated to try to undermine him and his government, which I think is true. And again, clearly the U.S. is in support of that, these provocations against Petro. The other fear in Colombia is everyone will tell you, is they worry that Ivan Cepeda will be killed, like Gaitan in 1948. When Petro ran for president, he campaigned with a bulletproof vest on, and he was, at one point, there was an assassination attempt on him while he was running for president, and there's been at least one against him while he's been president. So the chances of some sort of violent act to stop Cepeda, is relatively high. And that's a big concern.
Can you say something about maybe the Alvaro Uribe Vélez and the prosecution of him, and if he's still playing any role behind the scene with Colombia's far right?
Yeah, Alvaro Uribe, who, but by the way, I met him once at the presidential palace years ago. It wasn't a friendly visit, but I was allowed to visit with the AFL-CIO, and I was very critical openly towards him. Because at that time, he was presiding over unprecedented violence against social movements, including trade union leaders, which I raised with him. Yeah, so he was president, I think, from 2002 to 2010. And he was really he's the recipient of something called Plan Colombia, which was a $10 billion military aid package.
Wow.
Allegedly to fight drugs, though the White House ended up admitting once the plan had been completed that there wasn't 1 ounce drop in either coca production or cocaine trafficking from the country. But it was used to destroy huge swaths of the Colombian social movements. So Uribe is an important figure for the right in Colombia, even still. He's from Medellin. He was actually listed as number, I believe, 82 on the DEA's top drug traffickers in the world. In fact, some people just refer to him as 82 or number 82. But he's still very influential. And, the 2 right-wing candidates are close to him. So I think he still has some influence. Yes, he is being criminally prosecuted for some of, the crimes that he committed over the years. We'll see what those come to.
Can you just summarize what the right means in Colombia? Who is the right? What are their values?
Well, they're very much anti-communist, and like anti-communist everywhere, that translates into also anti-labor, anti-peasants, anti-poor, anti-indigenous, anti-Afro-Colombian. They represent the wealthy elite against, basically the rest of the population. And in the case of Colombia, the right has been very, very violent, murdering hundreds of thousands of people, disappearing hundreds of thousands of people, displacing millions of people. At one time, Colombia had the highest internally displaced population on earth at about 8 million. It's still, I think, relatively high. I think it's still in the millions of displaced people.
So
because they did,
Sorry. So
and
we
the
say
right was responsible for all that.
So when we say the left and the right, we're not talking about crazy left blue-haired people versus, Christians that believe in law and order. We're talking about a criminal group that puts the needs and the desires of the ruling elite or the ruling oligarchs or the predator classes, we call them, over the needs of the population.
Absolutely.
But the Catholic Church supports the right in Latin American countries, and Dan, you can weigh in. The right draws support from the church often, these conservative clergy, and by promoting conservative cultural issues, much like in the United States with the evangelical and the big mega churches often align with right-wing movements or Trump in the United States. I think in Latin America they do have a groundswell of popular support, correct, in the churches, which cultivate these conservative values, including things like abortion is a polarizing issue that the right draws support. Correct?
That is true to a large extent, though there has been a significant liberation theology movement in Colombia, and in fact, the ELN guerrillas were founded by a Catholic priest named Camilo Torres.
Oh yeah,
and his body he was
CIA
killed.
Tracked him. I know about him because of my study of police training programs. I was studying at the National Archive the police records, and there were intelligence reports where they were monitoring Torres, and he was ultimately murdered.
Yes, and his body was disappeared, but it was found recently, and actually Petro made sure he got a decent burial. And a Catholic priest that I know very well, Father Javier Geraldo, celebrated the mass for Camilo Torres when his body was returned to Bogota. And he's a liberation theologian. And in fact, during the worst years of the violence under the right wing in Colombia, according to the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Colombia, 80 Catholic priests were killed, and 2 bishops. And according to the Bishops' Conference, they were killed because they advocated for the poor. So certainly, while the institutional church has largely been aligned with the right, there's been a large sector of the church that has not been.
And what about the climate now? Because I know that Colombia, and that was your focus, was one of the worst countries as far as trade union activists being targeted by these right-wing paramilitary and vigilantes. So how is the climate now under Petro for unions and trade union activists?
It's much better now. At the high watermark, between 200 and 300 trade union leaders were being killed a year in Colombia.
Wow.
Over 4,000 trade union leaders have been killed in Colombia, which is outrageous. Can you imagine 4,000 trade unionists killed in the United States, which is a much bigger country? I mean, that would decimate the labor movement.
Well, why are they being killed? Please elaborate.
Well, because they cut into profits.
Thank you.
And also because they're leaders of social movements that give rise to people like Petro, So, yeah. So they've been a target for a long time, but it's much better under Petro, of course. He has the support of the labor movement, or much of it, most of it. There's a small right-wing sector of the labor movement, of course, but it's tiny, but it's mostly progressive and support Petro.
Oh, go ahead, Gloria.
When I was looking at sanctions on the president, it came up something with the Clinton sanctions.
That's what they call it, the Clinton sanctions. The official name is the Office of Foreign Asset Control sanctions. And what it does, it basically economically strangles whoever is the target of those sanctions. You're not allowed to use any banking in banks that are American or do any business with Americans or American companies. You're not allowed to travel to the U.S., though Petro's been given limited license to do that a couple times. But there's also over-compliance. So while Petro and his family had money in Colombian banks, which should not be subject to these sanctions, the banks froze their assets anyway because they were afraid they'd be sanctioned if they didn't do that. And it's very difficult, for example, for his wife to travel internationally or even domestically, because many carriers, again, even if they're not U.S. airline carriers, won't take her, Now, Petro has his own presidential plane, of course, but when his term is up in August, he won't have that anymore. And it will be difficult then for him to fly again if we're not successful in getting him off this list, which is that's what I am tasked to do, to try to get him off the OFAC list.
And they're claiming that he should be on this list for narcoterrorism. What's
allegedly,
why?
Yes, allegedly some sort of drug trafficking, which is a complete lie. It's ridiculous. I mean,
and as you pointed out, isn't the drug rates going down under him? I mean, because of these policies you're discussing, the crop substitution
Yes, he inherited a big problem. It had gone way up under his successor, Ivan Duque, flattened out under Petro, and now is starting to go down, So, and by the way, when they seized their assets as part of the sanctions, it was discovered they had $80,000 in the bank. I mean, that guy ain't getting rich. He's clean, Most people, even if they don't like Petro, will say that. He's not corrupt at all. And doesn't care about money. I mean, seriously, I'll give you a little story, When I met with him in January to help prepare him for the meeting with Trump, we were sitting there and he was eating these orange cookies, these square orange cookies that were terrible. He offered me one and I ate it just to be nice. It was terrible, but he ate like 5 of them, and he said, at one time he said it was either living off these or not being able to buy books. And I wanted to buy books. So I lived off these cookies, and he doesn't care about the finer things,
Wow.
So, yeah. I really admire him. He's a good man, So he doesn't deserve to be on the list.
Well, yeah, it showed that the war on drugs is a complete farce. As Gloria pointed out, they're putting people on the sanctioned list who are completely non-corrupt and actually, trying to, actually eradicate drugs, doing it in a more humane way through crop substitution. And as you pointed out, I mean, they freed, Juan Orlando Hernandez. The stuff with the Maduro, maybe you can comment, Dan, on the Maduro case. And I mean, this indictment of Maduro claimed he was head of this major drug cartel. And I mean, the evidence seems to be a joke. So, I mean, how would this
not
proceed?
Just a joke? I mean, yeah, by the time he was arraigned, the Justice Department dropped those charges because they admitted that the cartel of the Sun that they claimed he was the head of didn't even exist.
It was a group of corrupt army officers who wore a sun in like the 90s. And I think it was the CIA that was in league. I did an article how the CIA, it was like a clique in the Venezuelan military in the 90s that wore a sun on their sleeve, had nothing to do with Maduro. And the CIA was working with that group to bring drugs into the United States. So, I mean, my question is, how is this proceed in Colombia? I mean, Colombians, you're in tune with the country. I mean, they must see the U.S. as it's just ridiculous what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, actually, Petro's poll numbers increased after he was put on the OFAC list because the Colombians take umbrage at being pushed around, Yeah. So it kind of backfired in that sense.
I was a tourist.
You saw what Juan Orlando Hernandez is now up to, the former Honduran president who
what's he doing?
In jail for drug trafficking, right? He's now working with the current president of Honduras and with the current president of Argentina, Javier Milei. They had some big scheme to essentially spread propaganda in Latin America, particularly against leftist leaders like Petro.
Yeah.
So now we know why he was released from jail.
Yeah, and I think
go out and do that sort of thing.
Was part of a plan to get the right wing back in Honduras so they can set up these enclaves for foreign investors and high tech companies. And I think Peter Thiel had some investments in Honduras because I think the Orlando release was during the election cycle, and it was designed. Is that correct? That was another.
Yeah. And the current president, Nasri Esfura, clearly came to power through fraudulent elections. I mean, clearly those elections were stolen. And again, the U.S. doesn't care about that because the right person stole those elections, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's back to the future. Sadly.
Now it's back to the Cold War where they're building this extreme right-wing network of leaders. But I mean, I think what's your assessment? I mean, my sense is that Latin America is moving forward. that, I mean, the left, left-wing leaders, or the more popular leader, they brought a lot of benefits, whether in Nicaragua, Venezuela, Colombia, that is kind of the wave of the future. Even Mexico, I mean, Sheinbaum clearly has certain progressive instincts, and that people in these countries, are repudiating the right, and that these more progressive leaders have a better chance. Would you say that?
I would say it's mixed. I mean, I would say, like Comrade Lenin said, it's one step forward, two steps back. Chile just elected a right-wing president. Argentina elected a right-wing president. Bolivia now has a right-wing president. The DEA that was thrown out by Evo Morales is now coming back to Bolivia. Peru has a right-wing president. Ecuador has a right-wing president. Honduras now. So I think it's mixed. I think the struggle is very difficult. There was a moment in the early 2000s, with the so-called pink tide, where it did look like the left was going to take over pretty much everywhere in Latin America. But the U.S. has worked very, very hard to push those gains back. And, Gloria, you mentioned the lawfare, which was definitely used. But, there have been overt coups. Manuel Zelaya in Honduras was, when he was president, he was flown out of the country by the military.
We left off Honduras.
Yeah, they threw him out of the country. Of course, Father Aristide in Haiti was also flown out of the country at gunpoint by the U.S., France, and Canada. They sent him to the Central African Republic. That was done in 2004. Well, of course, the kidnapping of Maduro can't have a more blatant, coup than that. So the U.S. has been very busy in undermining the left in Latin America.
I was in Colombia as a tourist back in 2018, and I guess Duque was the president. And as a tourist thing, what you do is you go up into the mountains and you take a look at the coffee plantations and the production of coffee and all this. So I did that, and it was fantastic. I went to this little coffee plantation up in the mountains. And I guess this was I forgot what city it was outside. I think it might have been Santa Marta that we were up in the mountains.
Yeah, I was there recently. Yeah.
And as we're driving back, we pass other coffee plantations. And it was remarkable because all these coffee plantations had military guards like all over them. They had all of these trucks and weapons and stuff guarding these coffee plantations, allegedly. Now, the one we went to legitimately was one, but it seemed to me that there was a tremendous amount of cocaine protection and trafficking under the previous administration. I mean, visually, you couldn't miss it.
Yeah, the Colombian military has historically been very involved in the drug trade. And again, Petro's tried to delink the military from that. But the military in countries like Colombia, they have a mind of their own. It's not easy to clean up those organizations. He's only had 4 years to try, but he's made some good progress there. It's a much more humane country than it used to be. And again, I've been going there very regularly since 1999. I've probably been there 30 times or something throughout the country, And I do think it's a much more humane place, thanks to President Petro.
Well, back in 2018, you'd pass by a store in Santa Marta and there'd be bullet holes in the windows. It was crazy.
Yeah. Well, and again, the violence. Again, there's so many armed groups. The violence hasn't totally gone away, but and it's going to be a long process of changing, the society where you don't have that sort of violence. But again, it's something certainly Petro is working on. Again, a lot of this. Well, you can start at any point to kind of look at the sources of the violence, but Petro actually says he blames it on the support of the U.S. for the breakaway rebels in Panama in 1903 to steal the Panama and the Panama Canal. That really unleashed violence that continues to this day. But another important moment was the assassination of Gaitan in 1948, which led to La Violencia in the 50s, in which around 500,000 people were killed in what was essentially a civil war.
Wow.
And that civil war has raged since that time, with peaks and valleys. But again, it's very deep into the structure of Colombian society now. And the U.S., beginning in 1962, they started creating these death squads, which continue to haunt Colombia. And again, when you have that sort of meddling, it's very, it does damage, untold damage to the country.
When we think of the right wing in the United States, we don't think of them associated with death squads. We think of them, as supporting, let's say, big business or something like that. But in Latin America, the right wing are very closely aligned with death squads.
Yeah, and again, thanks to the United States, it was the U.S. that invented the death squads. A guy named General William Yarborough in 1962, and he said that, particularly in Latin America, because of the strong left there, and this was after, of course, the Cuban Revolution, and also after, the emergence of liberation theology, that the U.S. decided to create these armed groups that would not be official military, so that they could carry out crimes that were not linked to the official militaries that the U.S. was backing. So this was a U.S. brainchild, and the first place it was given rise to was Colombia. And then, of course,
and that with the counterinsurgency, because with the FARC emerging, because I did some research on these police training programs in the 60s and late 50s, and they were trying to adapt these irregular forces, as you say, to counter these guerrilla groups, which I think initially they had emerged because they were trying to redistribute some of the land, and they were subject to attack by landowners, and the government would back up the landowners. But I think what you're saying, Dan, is well documented. Even if you go to the National Archive, you can review some of those documents where the U.S. is developing these irregular forces that evolved into these death squads, and that there was a very active counterinsurgency program. And actually, with the Kennedy administration, that was zealous about counterinsurgency. A lot of people idealized John F. Kennedy because of the way he was assassinated, but his administration was committed to had this zeal for fighting like irregular warfare. Perhaps in part, Kennedy was not as favorable toward fighting big military operations, so he favored these covert approaches. But as you point out, that really warped Colombia. And over the years, I think you can trace a thread with Plan Colombia was basically an excuse to ramp up funding for the Colombian military and these paramilitary adjuncts, and for the U.S. just to provide all this high-tech military weaponry that was really used to continuously fight these left-wing groups. And as far as the question, what is the status of Plan Colombia now? Is that ended, or?
Well, Plan Colombia itself is ended.
But the U.S. is still providing a lot of military aid, no?
Yes, and it is, and again,
the guys are fighting drugs.
Yeah, and has a military presence there. Yeah, and which is dangerous because again, clearly they will use that presence and the military support to try to undermine the left and in Colombia and elsewhere. So, by the way, I saw for the first time in many years, I guess the U.S. is restarting its jungle training program in Panama. So they're clearly
training new Contras, huh?
yeah, they're getting ready to increase military intervention in Latin America. Of course, just as Israel has its Greater Israel Project, the U.S. has announced its Greater North America Project, which they see as going from Ecuador to Greenland. So I think you're going to see a lot more military activity of the U.S. in the hemisphere, and more overt regime change operations.
I just wanted to throw in also, there's the School of the Americas, which was renamed. We don't hear so much about that anymore.
Yeah, WINSEC. And did I tell you that when I flew home from Bogota, I sat next to the commandant of WINSEC. And then the woman next to me was from the Carter Center. So it was a very interesting 4.5 hours.
What did you discuss?
Well, he said he was from WINSEC, and I quickly said, "Oh, you mean the School of the Americas?" And he kind of winced. But, I didn't get into the weeds too much because I had to sit there for 4.5 hours. He did actually invite me. He said he'd like me to come and teach human rights at the School
of the Americas. That would be good.
Fine, I'll do it. Hey,
yeah. Give him a lesson on U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, that's an interesting opportunity,
Yeah.
You want to let the fox into the hen house? That's cool,
Yeah.
So anyway.
You can encourage a lot of defectors there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell some truth.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. So that was very interesting. And he actually, interestingly, he was coming back from Bolivia, and I believe Evo Morales had kicked out WINSEC. And again, now they're finding their way back into Bolivia. So, yeah, I think we're in a period of great, great turmoil in Latin America, unfortunately.
And Colombia is very vulnerable, as you say. If Cepeda wins, and if he goes too far to the left, they can quickly mobilize against him.
Absolutely. And again, the fear of him being killed is very, very great. Mm-hmm. Very great. So, pray for Ivan Cepeda.
Wow. How I just, Americans are so, I don't know, there's just, I don't even know the word I want to use compared to this bravery and this nationalistic pride where people will risk everything.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit just about that? Like, how is someone like Gustavo Petro able to just, I'm just going to put on a bulletproof vest and continue?
Well,
on?
he believes in a higher cause. He has principles, and that's something amazing to watch. And in Colombia and Latin America, I mean, that's not to say there aren't people in the U.S. like that. There are, and look at these folks on the flotilla to Gaza who've been detained and tortured. I mean, that people every day risk their lives to help others and to defend principles. And we need to be like that. I mean, I don't know if I could do that. I mean, I'd like to believe when the moment came, I could and would, but I can only hope that. So, by the way, I need to run now. I have another interview coming up. So
okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us.
This is lovely. I enjoyed
soon.
it. Thank you.
Yeah, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about Colombia. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you, my friends. Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, and I can add a point that, in the U.S., we have a lot of courageous people, but they can never get into that level that Petro's at, where they're actually a candidate for high office. I mean, I think the last time was George McGovern in 1972. He was more or less a pacifist who was running on the Come Home America platform. But, the Democratic National Committee renounced their support for him, basically threw the election to Nixon, and I think sent a signal that somebody like that should never be nominated to head their party. And we see what they used against Bernie Sanders. In 2016, they used all kinds of corrupt methods to eliminate more populists. And you can criticize Sanders, but he was more on the left. But they took elaborate measures to remove him. And we never see those fiery progressives, or somebody like a background like Petro, who was a real activist or involved with a left-wing guerrilla group. You never see those kind of people rise in American politics, because I think our system is so bought over by big money interest that they have no chance. And then I think our population has been totally propagandized. Yeah. Whereas, if you go to these countries, you find, because, you and I have traveled in a lot of different countries, and you find the people are much better informed, and they understand a lot of the injustices of the global economy and U.S. foreign policy. But when you talk to American, they're totally clueless, because the media and education system is so biased. And that's another major problem that we've been addressing a bit on this show. So,
I mean, many people in other countries will say that Americans are the most propagandized,
yeah.
And I can't argue with that,
Yeah.
but so I guess that's probably a big reason why people aren't more supportive of the working class, which is the class we're all in. I mean, I don't know anyone in the predator class. I never met anyone in that class.
Yeah, and Americans don't have a good grasp of world affairs and how American foreign policy, the injustices that some of which Dan was describing associate with U.S. foreign policy, just in Latin America, and how the U.S. allied with the far right groups that are often extremely violent and fascistic. Most Americans have very little understanding of that, because the media is so biased. If you read the New York Times, and that's targeting more liberal and educated audience, but it has article after article on how bad Maduro was, and Ortega. It just demonizes left-wing leaders, and it doesn't cover the history. The historical dimensions of U.S. intervention in Latin America are rarely ever addressed in any media or any textbooks. It's just kind of glossed over in standard history books that students read. It's left out of courses, even at the college level. You'll barely have any reference. And Latin American studies field, they kind of deliberately omit the U.S. role. Like, sometimes they will acknowledge certain injustice in Latin American history or class dimension, because I've studied at length, so I know how these fields operate. The professors leave out, that becomes the realm like conspiracy theory. If you talk, or now they have this kind of rhetoric, to be politically correct, that, oh, you're not giving enough agency to Latin Americans if you talk about U.S. involvement in those countries. So they leave it out. Even in Latin American history courses at college, they don't discuss the U.S. role in all these coups and supporting these violent regime like in Colombia, and all the military aid, or those counterinsurgency that Dan was describing. That's never covered in even college courses, let alone high school. So just the people just don't understand. If they had a better understanding, I think most Americans would advocate right away a major shift in U.S. foreign policy, and that's what the ruling elite does not want. So they rig the education system.
Well, since Dan had to leave quickly, Jeremy, maybe you can promote some of his books. There's one that you and him wrote together, which is on Syria.
Yeah, we could have also. Dan was also the lawyer of the Shiite Alawite community in exile, I think, in the United States, and together, and we could have discussed the situation in Syria, because he's also visited Syria many times, and he exposed the atrocities of the current Syria government toward minority groups and Christians. That's got no publicity in our media at all. And their attacks on the Shiite Alawite after they came in, because the Shiite Alawite was support. The previous leaders.
Jeremy, the short version. We're out of time.
Okay, well, Bashar
Where
al-Assad.
can you get these books?
Yeah, well, that is discussed in this book that Dan and I wrote together called Syria: Anatomy of Regime Change, published by Baraka Books. And this goes into the CIA's Operation Timber Sycamore and how, Assad, the U.S. foreign policy has a consistent pattern of targeting nationalistic leaders who would assert more control over their country's economy or stand up to U.S. imperial design. So the book looks at how Syria fits the model of U.S. foreign policy and how this was a violent regime change operation that received almost no. One of the chapters that I wrote focused on intellectuals and how they supported this violent intervention that set the groundwork for the war in Iran. There could be no war in Iran.
There's also, just not to interrupt too much, but there's also two other books that Dan has written that are really topical and important right now. One is on Iran. I don't know if Jayme can show that one. And then there's another one on Venezuela. So there's actually 3 books out right now that Dan called it on. I mean, and if you want to follow Dan Kovalik, you could find him on Twitter X, and I think Jayme will put some links in to this to
well,
our
he had
videos.
a whole series on regime change. He also wrote a book on Russia and regime change operations, and he wrote a book on Palestine. So he'd been looking at U.S. foreign policy interventions, and he's always been right on the mark and well ahead. Now all the activism focus on free Palestine, and he was writing about this a long time ago. So he's a great guy who he travels around, been able to travel to a lot of these countries, and he gets the story of the people of those countries, which unfortunately is rare in our media. A lot of journalists with major newspapers or media, they go to foreign country just to interview the elites of those countries or the U.S. embassy people. They don't capture what the people of the country are feeling or the historical aspect he goes into in his books.
Well,
and that's what we do in the Syria book as well.
What's amazing about Dan is his integrity. I mean, he really has tremendous integrity, and we're very happy, I guess, Jeremy and I both, to call him our friend. So let's just end the show and understand that the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's fun when you look at Dan's book, his books, because all his books are about all the things that
are happening now,
doing the last 2 years, like in terms of
and he was writing about it a while ago.
Yeah,
he visited that country, and he really got people's perspective. And he also gave the history. Oh, he did one on Nicaragua too. I reviewed his book.
Right.
I'm about to show that one.
Yeah, so they're great resources for people who want to better understand those countries, the history, and what the people on the ground are saying, not what U.S. Embassy and propaganda apparatus wants you to believe.
Oh, right. Yeah. I forgot about his Nicaragua book.
We did this one in 2023, so Nicaraguans better pay attention because he's almost a prophet about where U.S. is about to invade next.
Well, let's not give any ideas.
they already got the ideas. He's trying to expose them to everybody.
Yeah.
So I don't want to see it happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it happen. But
no. It's a terrible thing, and I don't know. It's quite terrible. What's going on?
I don't.
Okay, I gotta run. Yeah, let's call the wrap. Yeah.
All
Thank you.
Take care, guys. You can talk offline.
Okay, thanks to everybody for watching. I want to thank Craig Poss for Jardula. He's executive producer of this show. And we'll see you next week with another episode. Have a good weekend, everybody. We're out of here. Bye.